There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all, what's that word? One in Christ Jesus. See, the gospel doesn't just change our relationship to God, which it surely does. We're counted righteous before Him, we're adopted into His family, clothed with Christ. It also, though, changes our relationship to one another. See, the gospel is the great reconciler. The gospel, the good news of what Jesus has done, reconciles us to God and reconciles us to one another as the church. That's what he's pointing out here. See, the gospel breaks down all these barriers that in our world usually divide. Think with me through what he's saying. The gospel, first of all, breaks down the cultural barrier, or the nationality barrier. He says, there is neither Jew nor Greek. Two very different cultures, two very different nationalities. The Jews obeyed the law, thought they were really righteous and good. The Greeks, which is kind of like saying the Gentiles, the non-Jews, they were very open-minded and tolerant, and they didn't obey the law of God. So different in their foundations of their society. But in Christ, he's saying, there's no distinction, there's no difference in being a Jew Christian or a Greek Christian. You're just Christian. You're a son of God through faith in Jesus. So you no longer have to divide. You no longer have to have this barrier in between you because you have the same thing in common, the ultimate thing in common. You're a son of God through faith in Jesus. So think with me. This means that you have more in common with an African from the sub-Saharan desert that is a Christian than you do with your non-believing neighbor who lives right next to you. We have more in common with those who are in Christ because we're all part of the same family. We worship the same King. We're on the same mission than you do with the one who doesn't believe, who lives next door to you. All these cultural barriers come down in Christ, and we don't have to go, American Christianity is how it should be, or African Christianity is how it should be. No nation has to become like another nation to be acceptable to God. We have differences and we have distinction, sure, and those things are great, and we shouldn't just become this weird, we do everything the same, but we can celebrate the fact that we're different because in Christ we're all one. Secondly, the gospel breaks down the class barrier. It just keeps getting more specific and more specific. He says there is neither slave nor free. And without going off and getting really into this, essentially what this would mean for us is there's no difference in being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and the guy who works at McDonald's. There's no difference in the multimillionaire and the homeless person. There's no difference in class that we see in the world. The church doesn't associate according to class. The rich people don't just hang out with the rich people, and the poorer people don't just hang out with the poorer people. Not in the church. In the church, you have very well-off people who hang out with very not well-off people, people who are struggling, people who are trying to get themselves on their feet financially. In the church, we're all one. We don't have to divide over certain things. And it's beautiful to see that, and I think we see that as the church at Ecclesia. We see people that come from different walks of life, that wear different clothes, that make different amounts of money, and it's as if it doesn't really matter. We're all in Christ. That's what matters. Who cares if I wouldn't ordinarily hang out with you if I wasn't a Christian? Because we have Jesus in common, that barrier's down. You're my brother. You're my sister. That's what matters. So the people who are more well-off shouldn't look down on those who are like a blue-collar worker or who are poor or who are homeless. And on the other hand, those who are poorer and those who are homeless or those who just working class poor, like a lot of us tend to be, we shouldn't despise those who have more money than us. We should look to them as our brother, and they should look to us as brother. It goes both ways. That barrier totally comes down. We don't associate according to class anymore because the gospel has destroyed that barrier. Finally, the gospel breaks down the gender barrier. He says there is no male and female. This was perhaps the biggest barrier in Paul's day. As we talked about earlier, if you're a woman, you couldn't even be the heir of an estate. You couldn't inherit property. It wasn't even legal. As well, these Jewish false teachers that had come into the churches of Galatia, and they were trying to teach these people, you need to have faith in Jesus plus good works to be saved, to be acceptable to God. They were saying a lot of those good works consisted on you being circumcised. Men are circumcised. So what they were actually doing was excluding, and they're saying that, like, men can become Christians. Women are sort of second-class Christians. What Paul is saying, he's not saying there's no difference between men and women. Men and women can marry whoever they want and do whatever they want. And he's not saying that. But what he's saying is that men are not better than women, and women are not better than men. We each have equal footing in Christ. That's why he says there's no male, there's no female, there's no, the men are better or the women are better. No, we all have equal footing in Christ. Because as he said earlier, we're all sons. We're all heirs. So all of these barriers come down because of the gospel. We no longer associate according to our culture, according to our class, or according to our gender. We all associate because we're all one in Christ. We are united together. And only the truths of verses 26 and 27 bring this about. Only the truth of the gospel, that we're sons of God through faith and we are clothed with Christ, bring this kind of unity. Think with me. First, because now that we're Christians, we're all given the same status. No matter what your culture, no matter what your gender, no matter what your class, we are all sons of God through faith. We're clothed with Christ. So think, how could I ever be jealous of someone else when I'm a son of God? Do you think how ridiculous that is when we get jealous of other people? When I do, I just think, nuts. I'm crazy. I've got everything I need. I'm adopted into the family of God. How could I ever be jealous of someone else? Furthermore, how could I ever look down on anyone else when they're clothed with Christ? How could I ever think that I'm better than someone else? How could I ever look down on them when they are clothed with Christ? See, the gospel brings this kind of unity. First, because we all have the same status. Second, because before we came to Jesus, we all had the same status. Sinners under the wrath of God, under a curse. Before we were saved, we're all in the same playing field. Paul highlights the fact that there is no one that's good. No, not one. We are all in total need of grace. Before we're saved, after we're saved. So these truths that we're Son of God, clothed with Christ, that's what brings unity in the church. If you're jealous of people, you need to meditate and dwell on the fact that you are an adopted son of God. If you're looking down on other people who are in Christ, especially those who are in Christ, you need to look, how can I ever look down on someone who's clothed, who wears Jesus like a robe?